story of a farm girl, Part 1. As the weather was very fine, the people on the farm had hurried through their dinner and had returned to the fields. The servant, Rose, remained alone in the large kitchen, where the fire was dying out on the hearth beneath the large boiler of hot water. From time to time, she dipped out some water and slowly washed her dishes, stopping occasionally to look at the 2 streaks of light which the sun threw across the long table through the window, and which showed the defects in the glass. 3 venturesome hens were picking up the crumbs under the chairs, while the smell of the poultry yard and the warmth from the cow stall came in through the half-open door, and a cock was heard crowing in the distance. When she had finished her work, wiped down the table, dusted the mantelpiece, and put the plates on the high dresser close to the wooden clock with its loud tick-tock, she drew a long breath as she felt rather oppressed, without exactly knowing why. She looked at the black clay walls, the rafters that were blackened with smoke, and from which hung spiders' webs, smoked herrings, and strings of onions, and then she sat down, rather overcome by the stale odor from the earthen floor, on which so many things had been continually spilled, and which the heat brought out. With this, there was mingled the sour smell of the pans of milk, which were set out to raise the cream in the adjoining dairy. She wanted to sew as usual, but she did not feel strong enough, and so she went to the door to get a mouthful of fresh air, which seemed to do her good. The fowls were lying on the steaming dunghill. Some of them were scratching with one claw in search of worms, while the cock stood up proudly in their midst. When he crowed, the cocks in all the neighboring farmyards replied to him, as if they were uttering challenges from farm to farm. The girl looked at them without thinking, and then she raised her eyes and was almost dazzled at the sight of the apple trees in blossom. Just then, a colt, full of life and friskiness, jumped over the ditches, and then stopped suddenly, as if surprised at being alone. She also felt inclined to run. She felt inclined to move and to stretch her limbs and to repose in the warm, breathless air. She took a few undecided steps and closed her eyes, for she was seized with a feeling of animal comfort. And then she went to look for eggs in the hen loft. There were 13 of them, which she took in and put into the storeroom. But the smell from the kitchen annoyed her again, and she went out to sit on the grass for a time. The farmyard, which was surrounded by trees, seemed to be asleep. The tall grass, amid which the tall yellow dandelions rose up like streaks of yellow light, was of a vivid, fresh spring green. The apple trees cast their shade all round them, and the thatched roofs, on which grew blue and yellow irises, with their sword-like leaves, steamed as if the moisture of the stables and barns were coming through the straw. The girl went to the shed, where the carts and buggies were kept. Close to it, in a ditch, there was a large patch of violets, whose fragrance was spread abroad, while beyond the slope, the open country could be seen, where grain was growing, with clumps of trees in places, and groups of laborers here and there, who looked as small as dolls, and white horses like toys, who were drawing a child's cart, driven by a man as tall as one's finger. She took up a bundle of straw, threw it into the ditch, and sat down upon it. Then, not feeling comfortable, she undid it, spread it out, and lay down upon it at full length on her back, with both arms under her head and her legs stretched out. Gradually her eyes closed, and she was falling into a state of delightful languor. She was, in fact, almost asleep when she felt 2 hands on her bosom, and she sprang up at a bound. It was Jacques, one of the farm laborers, a tall fellow from Picardy, who had been making love to her for a long time. He had been herding the sheep, and, seeing her lying down in the shade, had come up stealthily and holding his breath, with glistening eyes and bits of straw in his hair. He tried to kiss her, but she gave him a smack in the face, for she was as strong as he, and he was shrewd enough to beg her pardon. So they sat down side by side and talked amicably. They spoke about the favorable weather, of their master, who was a good fellow, then of their neighbors, of all the people in the country round, of themselves, of their village, of their youthful days, of their recollections, of their relations, who had left them for a long time, and it might be forever. She grew sad as she thought of it, while he, with one fixed idea in his head, drew closer to her. "I have not seen my mother for a long time," she said. "It is very hard to be separated like that." And she directed her looks into the distance, toward the village in the north which she had left. Suddenly, however, he seized her by the neck and kissed her again, but she struck him so violently in the face with her clenched fist that his nose began to bleed, and he got up and laid his head against the stem of a tree. When she saw that, she was sorry, and going up to him, she said, "Have I hurt you?" He, however, only laughed. No, it was a mere nothing. Only she had hit him right on the middle of the nose. "What a devil," he said. And he looked at her with admiration, for she had inspired him with a feeling of respect, and of a very different kind of admiration, which was the beginning of a real love for that tall, strong wench. When the bleeding had stopped, he proposed a walk, as he was afraid of his neighbor's heavy hand, if they remained side by side like that much longer. But she took his arm of her own accord in the avenue, as if they had been out for an evening's walk, and said, "It is not nice of you to despise me like that, Jacques." He protested, however. No, he did not despise her. He was in love with her, that was all. "So you really want to marry me?" she asked. He hesitated and then looked at her sideways, while she looked straight ahead of her. She had fat, red cheeks, a full bust beneath her cotton jacket, thick, red lips, and her neck, which was almost bare, was covered with small beads of perspiration. He felt a fresh access of desire, and putting his lips to her ear, he murmured, "Yes, of course I do." Then she threw her arms round his neck and kissed him till they were both out of breath. From that moment, the eternal story of love began between them. They plagued one another in corners. They met in the moonlight beside the haystack and gave each other bruises on the legs, under the table, with their heavy nailed boots. By degrees, however, Jacques seemed to grow tired of her. He avoided her, scarcely spoke to her, and did not try any longer to meet her alone, which made her sad and anxious. And soon she found that she was enceinte. At first she was in a state of consternation, but then she got angry, and her rage increased every day because she could not meet him, as he avoided her most carefully. At last, one night, when everyone in the farmhouse was asleep, she went out noiselessly in her petticoat, with bare feet, crossed the yard, and opened the door of the stable where Jacques was lying in a large box of straw above his horses. He pretended to snore when he heard her coming, but she knelt down by his side and shook him until he sat up. "What do you want?" he then asked her. And with clenched teeth and trembling with anger, she replied, I want you to marry me, as you promised." But he only laughed and replied, "Oh, if a man were to marry all the girls with whom he has made a slip, he would have more than enough to do." Then she seized him by the throat, threw him o'er his back, so that he could not get away from her, and half strangling him, she shouted into his face, "I am enceinte. Do you hear? I am enceinte." He gasped for breath, as he was almost choked, and so they remained, both of them, motionless and without speaking, in the dark silence, which was only broken by the noise made by a horse as he pulled the hay out of the manger and then slowly munched it. When Jacques found that she was the stronger, he stammered out, "Very well, I will marry you, as that is the case." But she did not believe his promises. "It must be at once," she said. "You must have the banns put up." "At once," he replied. "Swear solemnly that you will." He hesitated for a few moments, and then said, "I swear it by heaven." Then she released her grasp and went away without another word. She had no chance of speaking to him for several days, and as the stable was now always locked at night, she was afraid to make any noise for fear of creating a scandal. One morning, however, she saw another man come in at dinner time, and she said, "Has Jacques left?" "Yes," the man replied. "I have got his place." This made her tremble so violently that she could not take the saucepan off the fire. And later, when they were all at work, she went up into her room and cried, burying her head in the bolster so that she might not be heard. During the day, however, she tried to obtain some information without exciting any suspicion. But she was so overwhelmed by the thoughts of her misfortune that she fancied that all the people whom she asked laughed maliciously. All she learned, however, was that he had left the neighborhood altogether. And now this story ends. Hey, thank you so much for listening to the whole story. If you liked this story and want to thank me for creating this story, then you can buy me a cup of tasty coffee. Just join our YouTube channel and be an official member of our family to support us for making even more interesting story videos for you every day. You know, it takes a lot of effort, research, and money to find and buy premium contents, and to writing, creating, editing, organizing, and publishing every single video, which could melt your hearts or could be one of the most interesting stories of all time. So, hit the like button to save this video. And most importantly, subscribe to our YouTube channel to learn English by watching super interesting English stories every day. Thank you.